We're live. We're live.
Fantastic. Welcome all. We are blessed with the presence of two fantastic fellow PHC ambassadors this evening in Dr. Jen Unwin and Dr. David Unwin. Jen Unwin and I recorded a fantastic podcast going back last year in regards to sugar addiction, which is something I'm hoping that we can get into again this evening. And Jen Unwin, along with husband David Unwin, are massive advocates for the low-carb, ketogenic style lifestyle in respect to reversing things like type 2 diabetes. So welcome both on board. It's a pleasure to see you both again.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, thank you.
No problem at all. This is super excited to get this one on. So there was a few things that that I wanted to cover in particular. The questions will come thick and fast, I'm sure. So anyone that has any questions, please pop them into the comments. I don't know if you guys have got access to the comments on the right-hand side of the screen as well, but there is a comment section there, and they will come through thick and fast, no doubt. But
well, there is a question
already. I'll talk about that.
Oh, fantastic. There we are. We made my job so much easier.
Which is a real sort of hot issue at the moment. Does vaping raise insulin? Because it tastes so sweet.
It tastes very sweet. I don't actually know if it raises insulin, but it talks to this topic that is my passion, which is addiction, particularly sugar and food addiction. And back in the day when they were all saying that nicotine wasn't addictive and did you no harm, they were adding sugar to cigarettes to make them more addictive. And obviously that game's been up for a while, but the big tobacco companies bought the big food companies, and the rest is history. But obviously the vaping issues in the news, and they make it sweet, they market it to kids, so the nicotine and the sweetness together make it more addictive, make the habit and the substance more addictive, more difficult to give up. I doubt it. I doubt it raises insulin. I think it's probably just a sweet taste in the mouth. But anything that gets you hooked to that sweet taste is it's hooking you to the nicotine, but it's also going to be hooking you to other sweet flavors, which is probably going to get you in a cycle of craving. And just don't do it, kids.
How can it be helpful to have yet another addictive substance on the go? We've got enough of them. It's just a tax on unfortunate people, isn't it? Making money out of them.
Yeah.
Just a historical point. Heroin, was sold by Bayer at the beginning as non-addictive. In the 1880s, it was sold as a non-addictive cough suppressant, heroin. And it took over 30 years before that was nailed. So we keep going round and round the same thing over again, and we're always slow to cotton on.
It's the nature of the way that our brains are wired, and there's certain substances that we just get hooked on, and then we lose control over. I think, unfortunately, the food manufacturers, the cigarette manufacturers, they know that, and they exploit that kind of weakness, if you want to call it that. I mean, it wasn't a weakness back in the day, because back in the day we needed to be driven to survive. It was a survival mechanism that got us extremely motivated to go out and seek food, and particularly if we could find anything sweet like honey, or maybe nuts have a certain sweetness. If we could be kind of driven even into danger to get those things, that was great. But these days, of course, there isn't any danger, but we're just still highly driven to seek out that sweetness, that sort of highly calorific sorts of foods. So just be aware, everybody, of how your brain works. So I think if you have that information and you have that understanding that it's not our fault that we're driven to eat these foods that are everywhere, these ultra processed foods. They're designed to get us hooked, and our brains are kind of built that way that we do get hooked. But I think once you've got that information, it enables you to sort of get a bit mad about it and sort of fight back, when you're in the garage trying to get to just pay the bill, and there's all the kind of shelves of foods you can just stay strong. Sorry, go on, Stephen, you were going to say something.
No, well, I was going to say, I mean, you can look at it from the other point of view, that nature, I mean, fruit wants to be eaten, and lots of plants look like they should, they should be tasty. But obviously, I think when you're talking about addiction, I find people underestimate how powerful it is. And they think, oh, I can just have this, that'll be fine. I'll just have one cashew. Or, I've never met anybody that can have 5 cashews ever.
Yeah, who can do that? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I think that's sort of how it works in the brain, and particularly for people like me who are real food addicts. You know really logically that you can't do that, but somehow that little dopamine reward part of the brain is sort of saying to you, oh, just one, it's your birthday, you can handle it. You kind of at the same time know that isn't true, but you do it anyway. It is just part of the addiction process.
I think what's interesting is we have two standards, really. One is, if it was cigarettes or alcohol, then you'd be saying it's clear, it's addictive. You shouldn't be having that. But if it's cake, then it's a treat, or sometimes it's silly. I keep going back to it, and it's actually, I see it as very serious. I see people lose their lives because of what they eat, and I think Jen's onto something really here.
Yeah.
With food addiction. And what's annoying is that at the moment, food addiction is not an actual illness. It's not classified as an illness. And that means that clinicians like me, we're not obliged to help anybody with food addiction, because I can tell somebody, well, it doesn't exist. And until we get it classified as an actual illness, nobody is entitled to any help. And that's what Jen is doing.
Yeah.
In the conference in the Royal College next May.
Thank you for mentioning that. May the 17th.
Friday,
May the 17th at the Royal College in London. We're having a one-day conference, so it's extremely exciting. We've got some amazing speakers coming. So what we've been doing, a few of us, is working on trying to get all the big experts in research, but also clinicians and experts in the field of food addiction to come together to come up with some consensus statements around the condition, because there's a lot of confusion, like what should we call it? Should we call it food addiction or sugar addiction or ultra processed food addiction? What should we call it for a start? And what are the best treatments, etc., etc. So we're all coming together at the moment in small groups, and we're getting this consensus together, and we're going to launch it on May the 17th in London next year. And we've got Rob Lustig coming, we've got Nicole Avina. These are all sort of massive names in the space. Vera Tarman, who does the Food Junkies podcast, which, if anyone's interested in this topic, they should definitely listen to the Food Junkies podcast. And the probably the best news for us is that Chris Van Tullochen, whose book that you'll have come across, Ultra Processed People, that's been so successful, and he's really sort of raised the profile of this issue in the UK and sort of internationally. He'll be coming to open the conference, so we're super excited. Hope people will come. But there is also a live stream, which of course is much more affordable. And we're also raising money. It's a little plug for the conference, but we're also raising money to fly in these amazing international speakers, so that we can sort of have them in London. So we've got a Just Giving page as well. So if it's okay, I'll send you guys the links, and we can perhaps put those under the video when it goes out. So if anybody wants to either come to the conference or to donate to the cause of getting food addiction recognised by the World Health Organization as a legitimate condition that, as David says, does actually, take lives and health, and is becoming more and more of a problem.
Yeah, can I pick up on that? Because my stepfather had amputations due to diabetes. This was way before I knew all about this, in my teenage years. And even then, maybe I had an intuitive nature there, and I thought it was probably all the stuff he was eating that led to this. But anyway, David snuck in there that it is a serious thing and people have died because of food addictions. I wonder if just David, if you wouldn't mind just briefly explaining your role now. Now we've heard from Jen, and yes, everything will be in the descriptions, by the way, about the conference. So yeah, we'll do that definitely. But David, what do you do? And obviously,
Thank you. I'm a Royal College General Practitioner's clinical expert in diabetes. I am a GP. I've looked after the same population in Southport for 37 years. And in our clinic, we've been offering a low carb approach to people with type 2 diabetes. It's 11 years now. It'll be 11 years in January.
11, yeah.
And we've published about 20 papers now. And I think it's true that we have published the best results in any diabetic clinic in the world. And this is in the NHS, the poor old NHS 10-minute appointments. So we're really proud of that because we're getting astonishing results around the fact, really, why don't you eat foods that don't put up your blood sugar? If a high blood sugar that's what damages your arteries, then we ought to be eating healthy food that doesn't put up your blood sugar. And really, put simply, that's a low carb diet. And that's what we do in our clinic.
And we should say, shouldn't we, that in the last 12 years, David hasn't had to refer a single diabetic patient for amputation or
I haven't even, no, I haven't had any. I've not had a single person lose their vision. I've not referred anybody for an amputation. I haven't referred a single patient to a vascular surgeon. I haven't seen a single diabetic foot ulcer, all of which was quite common before. So,
and if people go low carb in the first year of being diagnosed with diabetes, what percent?
You've got if you go low carb in the very first year of being diagnosed, and of course this assumes that you're cooperating with your GP and so on, the prescriber, you have a 70% chance of achieving drug-free diabetes remission. And that we published that. It's an open access paper, BMJ Nutrition, and the diet sheets and everything are all in there. So.
And it's not that the other 30% get worse. they improve. They just don't necessarily get into that remission sort of category, but their health is vastly improved. The people who struggle the most are, I mean, I've never been diabetic, but people like me who have this of food addiction problem, who even when they know, like probably your father-in-law maybe knew that he wasn't eating the right things and that was harming him, even when they know that, they can't always stick to it consistently. So they'll do it for a while and then they fall off the wagon, so to speak, and they know. But that's the importance of having that continuity of care, that support, those support groups, though, so that there's no shame, there's no failure to it, and they can always come back. So we've been running groups for the last 12 years, and we ran one the other day with another ambassador from the Public Health Collaboration, and there's a couple of people in the group that have been coming the whole time for 12 years, just because they know they need that accountability and that they need that support. So although we always say, although it's simple, actually, the advice is incredibly simple, which is don't eat foods that put your blood sugar up. So don't eat sugars and carbohydrates. I mean, it's simple. You don't have to read a book. It's just that piece of simple advice. It's not easy. It's not always easy, and particularly in the current food environment. I think when we've got all these experts together, they're all saying, in a way, this sugar and carbohydrate processed food addiction is probably the hardest addiction to beat, because it's the only substance that we give our kids that is sort of psychoactive, and it's sort of encouraged, and it's sort of given as a reward and a treat, and it's culturally sort of endorsed that you give kids and adults sweet things. We have to eat. It's not like cigarettes where you could just not buy cigarettes ever again, or you don't have to go to a bar or bring alcohol into the house, for example. We have to we have to eat and we have to sort of negotiate the food environment every day. So yeah, it's quite a difficult condition to manage, really, and people do need that ongoing support and understanding,
particularly
particularly at Christmas.
when you
Oh my
say,
God.
I mean,
Yeah,
all those chocolates, those tubs of roses, it's a really
It's
I'll be mopping up after Christmas in the clinics.
yeah,
I'll be helping people and so on.
yeah.
Do you know,
I think
there's so many things that I'd like to unpack there, or that we could even go into. I know we've got loads of questions, so I won't take up too much. I know Steve tends to tell me off for going off on one a little bit, but you know, you came back to a few simplicities there in regards to it coming back to being sugar addiction. And Stephen and I recorded a super simple video recently on diabetes and how to combat that. And coming back to those other 30%, I dare say that maybe they are possibly not living the lifestyle as strict as they could be in regards to foods that contain lectins that, you know, would still generally be deemed to be low carb, because the lectins will bind to the insulin receptor and still signal the body to increase insulin at 5 times the rate that insulin would be from carbohydrate. But I work with a lot of diabetic patients through Diabetes UK and off, and everyone who has stuck the advice has seen a complete reversal, which is absolutely incredible. No drug on the market can boast, you know, a reduction rate or recovery rate of that much. But I think you hit the nail on the head exactly when you said that it's not your fault, because the podcast that we recorded was, and we called it food addiction. And we probably should have gone with sugar addiction, because I got told off for that, because food is a necessity, but sugar isn't. You know, we do need to live. But you're right, it blocks, you know, the neurotransmitter signals within the body that process things like dopamine and serotonin, and we are hardwired to chase these. And the simple fact is, a sweet fix or a carbohydrate fix will elicit this response and hinder our body's ability to create it naturally. So we further consume these foods, which lead us into this vicious circle of reaching for these sweet treats. And people don't understand that it isn't your fault. But when you do understand, you're armed with the knowledge in order to make those. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And you
Sorry, David.
Well, the other thing I just add in is the idea that insulin blocks fat burning. So it's a double whammy. There's all that going on in your head. On top of that, the odd biscuit through the day is blocking your ability to burn your own fat.
100%.
You are hungry.
So
you're
genuinely,
hungry.
people, I was genuinely hungry when I was eating biscuits all day long as a GP. And I didn't understand that a continual drip feed of carbohydrate was blocking my ability to burn fat. And I genuinely was hungry. So that I ate all the biscuits, and then I ate enormous meals as well. Yeah. And I think that needs adding in about the insulin blocking fat burning. And that's why somebody who's very heavy, when they say they're hungry, they are.
Yeah. It's 100%. The insulin upregulates lipoprotein lipase, which breaks the bonds on the glycerol backbone, sends the fat into the fat cell, but it also blocks hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme we need to put that fat back into the bloodstream for us to use for fuel. And again, as you rightly say, that's what people don't understand. The second you elicit this response within fat storage mode, and regardless of how much exercise you do, it's biologically impossible to burn that fat. So with the best will in the world, if insulin is elevated, if you've got blood, you know, sugar in your blood, which requires that insulin, it is biologically impossible to burn that body fat. But carbohydrate is not required. Sugar is not required. Proteins and fat are essential for life. But, you know, we could go on and on. I think probably an hour isn't enough, but it's...
when I first heard that key piece of information, and so I read the book by John Briffer, Escape the Diet Trap. That was how it all started for me. And when I read that simple fact, because we've been told for all our lives that you need carbohydrate for energy. When I read that simple fact that you don't need carbohydrate, you make the little bit that you need, you make it yourself. I mean, it was just, you know, everything kind of fell into place. And it's just giving people that piece of information is so powerful.
I think sometimes things like that, Jen, when I did my diabetes qualification, because I came from the outside, I didn't do the medical route. I was a personal trainer. Then I was an advanced personal trainer. I was training someone in the Olympics who had type 1 diabetes. So I then got interested. And because I'm an outsider, things that make no sense to an outsider seem to flummox all the tutors, because I remember a lecture, and I do bore people with this ever such a lot, but it was a real moment for me, where they were talking about dosing insulin in relation to carbohydrate intake. And I put my hand up and said, why, when you've got this problem of overproduction of insulin because of the consumption of carbohydrates, why don't we reduce the carbohydrates and reduce the insulin? It's, to me, really obvious, really obvious. And it was like I was the alien.
Yeah. It's like
what
the Emperor's New Clothes, isn't it? It just takes someone to sort of call it out, and then that received wisdom has to be questions like, what is the mechanism by which why are people advised to eat carbohydrate? It makes no sense at all.
It makes no sense.
It's a few of us who keep saying, what? That makes no sense. Yeah.
So could we do a few questions, just whistle through, because a lot of them are picking up on what you've said. Here is Cami. She's got a off the wall question, I think. I always wondered why we have taste buds for sweet taste at the tip of the tongue. Why is that? What purpose does it fill? Other carnivores don't have that, as far as I know, but they do actually, by the way. Dogs, cats, bears all have sweet receptors. But any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think so much of our physiology has to do with the fact we've had a much longer history as cave man and woman than we have as modern man. And when we were cave man and woman, putting on weight to survive the winter, imagine if we lived in England now in a cave, and the only way to get through the winter would be as fat as possible in the autumn. And the way to get fat is eat lots of sweet stuff.
All the fruits. So
the berries and so on, because that stimulates insulin. Insulin pushes the sugar inside cells and it's turned into fat. So it's highly adaptive. In the ancient environment, it really means you're far more, somebody like Jen, who could put on weight easily.
I'd have been a survivor.
She'd have got through the winter.
No worries.
As I've said, so that we're really sensitive to the sweet taste and we pursue it.
Yeah.
And children will stand there and pick blackberries all day, but they're eating most of them.
Yeah.
The point is, we're now eating in an artificial autumn for a winter that never comes. We're surrounded with eat what you like.
Fruit all year round, sweet tropical fruits that we never would have had here naturally for our sort of genetic heritage, bananas and things like that. Peaches.
But for cavemen, winter went on from November and there was absolutely nothing sweet or really any carbohydrate to have again until probably April. So that's why we can taste sweet. It was an imperative. And now we're hardwired against that, and we can't defend ourselves because of the hardwiring.
Oh, I love this, Rachel. Isn't it? It isn't just ultra. Yeah, I'm really glad, because I wanted to come back to that. So, Richard, you were saying,
read it out, Jen? Can I just read it out? Rachel, thanks for the question. It isn't just ultra processed foods are so complex that the breadth of food causes issues.
Yeah. So we were saying this complicated issue about what should we call this condition, because you're right in some ways, Richard. It's not all foods, so in some ways it's a misnomer to call it food addiction, but it isn't just sugar either, because we were talking about cashews at the top there. So those of us with this kind of problem of control over foods, obviously ultra processed foods, those are designed to really get us going, and this combination of sort of sweet, salt, fatty, and those are the sort of creamy textures that they often make in manufactured food. So that that's definitely a problem for most of us. sugars and grains, particularly refined grains and very carbohydratey foods, especially combined with fat. So, obviously bread is so much more, irresistible if it's got fat on. So it is more than, the problem is more than just sugar and carbohydrate.
For some people,
I think
this is it varies.
It's a little bit unique. So some people have a problem with nuts, particularly if they're roasted and salted, and then some people have a problem with dairy. And we have lots of people come on our courses who've actually done quite well. They're low carb, they've gone keto, and they've really got a problem with cream. Like, they're really finding it hard to quit the cream and the butter, even though they know, that they're overeating those things. So it can sort of transfer to the problem. The eating problem can transfer to those kinds of foods. So so Rachel's completely right. It isn't just sugar. It isn't all foods. It isn't just ultra processed food. So it is quite difficult. Yeah.
And where do you think seed oils fit into the inflammatory issues? That's Rachel again.
Oh, that's a complicated one. As part of this, of course, you've got the omega-6, omega-3 story. And so omega-6 fats are pro-inflammatory, and the omega-3s are part of defense against inflammation. And we know that the modern diet, the ratio of one to the other is important, and it's changed probably by 20-fold in the last 100 years. So we're now, the vegetable oils and the seed oils are very high in terms of omega-6, very low in omega-3. And it isn't just that, it's also that ratio. Depending on what you feed animals, it affects the ratio of the meat that you eat later. And we know that the ratio in, for instance, if you took venison or conservation grade meat, and then you compared it to lot-fed beef, I think the conservation grade meat is 3 times better. So that's part of it, is the omega-6, omega-3.
I don't know if you guys know much about this, but there is some stuff, isn't there, about seed oils and the cannabinoid process. Do you know anything about this, Rich? It's a bit beyond my pay grade. I believe that those seed oils can sort of mimic certain. Is that right?
Yes, Rich, come on.
It's, I think there's an entire other podcast that we could go into in regards to that. But quickly coming back to the omega-6, I think that there's there is a lot of information pointing to the fact that it's the fact that omega-6 is generally oxidized, and it is important to note that some other oils, including omega-3s in the form of fish oil in supplement form, can also become oxidized. Most oils oxidize over time. And what I find, so if we look at beef, for example, beef's got a linoleic acid of around 2%, and I think it goes up to 3 or 4 with lamb, but then it's 20 with pork. And for this reason, many people don't consume pork because of the linoleic acid content. But there would be an argument there that if we eat it fresh, then in essence, it's not oxidized, and that would be okay. But then oil from cooking, from a cooking perspective, is oxidized. So I think it's important to remember that omega-3s and other oils may also confer a downstream deleterious effect, and I'm always careful in regards to oil supplementation, because what some clients of mine have tried to do in the past is offset, because they don't want to cut out the foods that they're eating that contain these toxic compounds. Well, if it's a ratio, they think, well, I'll eat more omega-3s, but instead of consuming it from natural sources, mackerel, sardines, salmon, they may supplement with omega-3s, but the omega-3s themselves can also be oxidized.
You make such a good point, and that explains in the research why supplements never do as well as you would get from the sourcing the oils in a whole food. So I think you're onto something there. Some of them have gone rancid.
So Andy 828. Sorry, Rich, I'm doing the business end.
That's
I
okay.
feel like
No, you're right. Yeah, don't let me carry on talking because I'll take up the next 30 minutes. So you
It's just
fire
that,
away.
people have kindly tuned in and have got questions. And we've got
Definitely.
these two experts here.
Definitely.
So Andy 828, do artificial sweeteners, i.e. Sweetex, Candle, stevia, etc., cause a spike in insulin?
I think they probably do.
Well, so my problem with sweeteners isn't, I mean, I think there is some evidence for that, isn't there? But my problem with sweeteners isn't so much that as just that it keeps you craving sweet things, and at the end, most of them, at the end of the day, most of them are chemicals, so we don't really know that, we don't really know the effect that they're going to have, and we may not know. A bit like cigarettes, you don't know for a few decades really what the effects are going to be. But the main problem for me is that, particularly if you have a bit of a addictive relationship with certain foods, or if you have a lot of cravings for foods, they're only going to make those worse. So if you need to use sweeteners to get yourself off sugar as a transition, then fair dues, but don't use them long term. Try then and quit them. And I can speak from experience and say that I think sweeteners were as hard, if not harder, to quit than sugar for me. So things like Diet Coke and sugar-free gum, stuff like that, I had quite a bad relationship with, and took me a while to get out of that. So I think they can be part of the addictive process.
I agree. I have patients who cannot get off sweeteners, and it leaves them vulnerable because they get over hungry, particularly if they're stressed, and then that leads them back to unwise eating. And I never think they're quite safe till they've come off the sweeteners. Just to finish on that one, I mean, there was a really good study on this where they randomly allocated children to two groups. One got sugary fruit juice and the other got just was sugar-free but sweetened with sweeteners. And it's interesting that the kids allowed to drink the sugar-free sweetened drinks ended up the fatter of the two groups. And that was the study that impressed me the most. I agree with Jen. If you need sweeteners while you're transitioning off sugar, then fair enough. But you should, a bit like using methadone, you should aim to come off it in the end.
Yeah, just to jump in there briefly, Steve, before you jump on that, I think the type of sweetener is important also. So what they can do is cause a sylvatic response. So despite not consuming any sugar at all, they give the signal to the brain that sugar is coming. And in some people, it is a small percentage, but it can elicit an insulin response. The two in my experience, and there are others, the two in my experience that don't seem to do this are erythritol and stevia. Now, erythritol is a polyol that is genuinely carb-free, whereas other polyols like xylitol and maltitol can still be absorbed by as much as 60% as carbohydrates. So not all of the carbohydrate within those polyols are excreted from the body. But I think allulose is another one. But it's I agree exactly with what you're saying there. It's I think they're a segue, but we shouldn't rely too heavily on them. And when we remove these, this is when all of those cravings and things go away, and this is when people see. And I believe that this is why many become carnivore ultimately, because vegetables, for me, as I was on my journey, my transition from low carb to keto into carnivore, vegetables tasted awfully sweet. And prior to that, they'd never tasted sweet at all.
Milk and things, you can taste the sweetness in nuts, and you really can. Yeah.
And the milk, coming back to a point you made earlier, the casomorphine, the highly addictive compound in milk and cheese, and this is why sort of dairy products can be an issue. And even A2, which is arguably better, but even that can cause intestinal permeability. So, but again, it's this gravitation, isn't it, in regards to where you are on your journey, I think.
Yeah, and how you respond. You
just mentioned casomorphines. I want to talk about the Fruitarians in a minute. So I don't want to ignore that question. It's a good one. But there was a wonderful study using cheese to treat diarrhea. And the reason it works is because it turns into morphine-like substances, particularly for some people. And I have known of clinical cases of the most terrible constipation imaginable, just caused by dairy, because of its ability to turn into morphine-like substances, which also make it potentially addictive as well. Let's get on to that fruitarian question.
Yes. Although many people in the chat have already answered this, but I'd like to hear your opinion.
I'd like that. Yeah.
How come fruitarians are the skinniest people on the planet when they eat carbs all day long?
There's an error when we talk about weight. We forget that how heavy you are and the weight that you have it isn't just fat, it's also muscle. And if you have a diet with very little protein in, you're going to really struggle to maintain muscle mass. And so if you only ate fruit, I would really worry that you wouldn't have enough protein to sustain muscle mass. And particularly for older people like me, I don't absorb protein as well. And it's really important for older people to make sure they have enough protein. So that's
also, it would be terrible for your brain. Don't worry about being skinny. But you need
bones.
And you both need amino acids and fatty acids for the whole body. But as a psychologist, I'm always thinking, oh, your poor little brain wouldn't have any of the stuff it needs to, and our cells are turning over all the time, replacing. And if you're not eating the amino acids and the fatty acids, your body starts eating itself to help you to survive, really. So really, those people are in a sort of starvation mode. It's horrible when you see them. It just upsets me. Right. White Wolf says the problem with sugar addiction.
You have to let them. That's their job, Jen.
I'm reading it. Most people don't realise that carbs are sugar. They think
that's not your job.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
It's well read, Jen. That's fine. I'm happy to have a night off. I did this one because I know it's a subject also close to Rich's heart. The problem with calling it sugar addiction is most people don't realise that carbs are sugar. Yeah. They think sweets, puddings, cereals are all okay. They don't realise that they could be problematic. But yes, far away.
So I didn't really realise that for the first 25 years as a GP, and I advised people to avoid biscuits and cakes. And then it was a patient who pointed out that I was an idiot and maybe I wasn't even medically qualified because bread is sugar. And this led to me developing the teaspoon of sugar equivalent charts, which are on the PHC. So the headline figure would be 150 grams of boiled rice is equivalent to 10 teaspoons of sugar. So your body can't really tell whether it had 10 teaspoons of sugar or 150 grams of boiled rice, or a banana is about 6 teaspoons of sugar. Mm-hmm. A single slice of brown bread is about 3 teaspoons of sugar. So on the PHC, in fact, if you just Google PHC in capitals, Unwin and sugar, you'll see there are 7 infographics. And the hot news is they're now in 28 different languages. They've been translated 28 times. A lot of new Indian languages are there. And I think those infographics are very useful for people wondering about the effect of their dietary choices.
Mm.
Starchy.
Yeah, spot on. And we've just posted that into the comments as well, so the link is there, and we'll make sure that it goes out on the main vid. But yeah, this is the video that Stephen and I recorded recently. Super basic terms, and Stephen and I have been accused in the past of becoming too sciencey and going too much in depth. So we thought and the reason that we came to this conclusion is that when I hold these meetings with Diabetes UK, for example, most of them tell me that they do not eat any sugar. Mm. So when I ask, well, what do you eat for breakfast? Oh, well, I eat cereal for breakfast with a banana, and I have toast at 10 o'clock and I have a bowl of pasta. People don't realize in simple terms what sugar is. And that's why we created this video. And I think all we've had in regards to the comments in response to that was negative comments because it wasn't complicated enough. But people don't understand that many of us who are listening today are well done our journey, but we really need to take it back to super simple steps, and we need to educate people from the ground up, because it is we don't understand that most of these people really don't understand the carbohydrates are sugar, and carbohydrates are in everything.
Yes.
For me, the whole thing is about encouraging people to be curious. So if you've got a high blood sugar, where did it come from? What did you eat? And of course, with the advent of the Freestyle Libra, that's changing things. It's really changing things, because for people who are curious, a Freestyle Libra will, you get the feedback really fast, and you see you've eaten something, and patients are astonished. When they eat cornflakes, they get a massive spike. They eat bread, another one, pile of rice. And the next few years are so interesting with this continuous glucose devices. They're ushering in hope, really, I think.
Right, I'm not reading it.
Landers, by the way, I've been talking about this recently, but I'll let the experts have a go first. Good evening, Keto Pros. That's good evening to you, Richard. If I don't ask, I will never know. Through the evolution of humans living in the agricultural age, is there such a thing as being glucose adapted?
Ooh.
Do you know, I can see David chomping at the bit with this, and I think I know where he's going to go with it, but you fire away and I'll jump on.
Okay. I think there probably is to an extent. And we know, for instance, that people from India at a lower weight are going to develop type 2 diabetes. So they seem to be less adapted to sugar than we are in the West. And that's in part linked with muscle mass, because actually one of the best removers of sugar is muscle mass. And people with a higher muscle mass can tolerate more sugar. So I think to an extent that may be true. I don't know, but that's my hunch. And I'm interested to know what you think.
Fantastic. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's exactly the case. We become sugar adapted because we speak about fat adaptation constantly, becoming fat adapted. All we are doing is going back to our natural physiological state. We are born in the metabolic state of ketosis. We've evolved this way our entire existence. So I think sugar adaptation is in fact what we are doing through this overconsumption of carbohydrate. And I would be inclined to believe that is the case, rather than becoming fat adapted. All we are doing when we restrict the carbohydrate and go back to our normal way of eating an evolutionary appropriate diet, we fall back into our natural physiological state. This is why it takes as little as 3 days to become ketogenic. Our bodies are constantly fighting to get back into this. And I've been living the lifestyle for 10, 11 plus years, 4 of which I've been carnivore. And when I was competing professionally, I would put carbohydrate in to fill the glycogen in the muscle in order to give the perception that I was doing this. I was utilizing it as a tool for a purpose, not for any health benefit. And I would, between the fat feed and the glyco feed, I'd gain 17 pounds within 4 days on a lean frame, which is incredible. And that's what allowed me to achieve the things that I achieved in bodybuilding. But it was crazy that when I was putting the carbohydrate in, I would consume up to 900 grams of carbohydrate for as many as 3 days. On day 2, I was still producing ketones. My body was fighting to stay in that metabolic state. It didn't want to go back into glycolysis. It's almost a case that my body could switch seamlessly between using the fuel, almost being dual fueled. But on day 3, it was just too much, and I would become, I would come out of a ketogenic state. But the day after, my body would bounce right back in. And I think it's important to remember also that when we live this lifestyle and we speak about food addiction and we think that, we've fallen off the wagon, as you mentioned earlier, this is all about the rule and not the exception. If we get back up, shake ourselves off, one day doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the game is over. It doesn't mean that because one day leads into 2, then it's the weekend, and I'll start on Monday, and before you know it, 3 months have gone and everything has been lost. But just that one day won't make an awful lot of difference. But the longer you can be strict, the more benefit you're going to achieve, and the easier it is to fall and slip back into this metabolic state comfortably. So that's what I believe. It's our natural metabolic state, and we do have to consume glucose in order to become glucose adapted, as it were.
Yeah, and I will say to people that may be new to the channel, if they think, well, I've never heard of all this, this is just a thing they're making up. I did some research the other day on PubMed, and I typed in a search for glucose toxicity, and I had just under 25,000 studies to choose from. So it's been studied a lot. Glucose toxicity is a real thing. And anyway, that's I won't get into my views about it, but I just thought I'd mention that because that was fresh in my mind. I couldn't believe how many studies there were on this. Matthew is asking, what are David and Jen's thoughts on intermittent fasting and longer fasts? And I would like to also add dry fasts as well. What are the views on those things?
Yeah. We haven't really done dry fast. We don't know so much about that, so we'd be interested to hear what you think. Although we remember Andrew Scarborough talked about doing dry fasting, didn't he? We intermittent fast, and we encourage people to sort of move in that direction once they've got fat adapted. So we want once or twice a day, normally twice a day. We want one big meal and then maybe a smaller meal. We have done longer fasts. I've done quite a few. I think I overdid it a bit in a typical kind of addict way. I went a bit over the top with the fasting. So I haven't done so much of that recently. And I think food addicts do need to be a little bit careful with fasting, because they tend to overcompensate after the fast and kind of eat more. But that's quite an individual thing, really. But yeah, intermittent fasting, big fans.
Yeah, I think we often forget that for people with diabetes, protein spikes insulin as well, and we're trying to avoid stimulating insulin. So there's a thing that every time, the more often you eat, the more you spike your insulin, and also the hungrier you become. I mean, we've really noticed that. The more it's funny, the more you eat, the hungrier you are. If you fast, it's so weird because you're not hungry. And there's some really good studies on the idea that when you eat calories and how often you eat them affects weight gain.
Difference, yeah.
Eating calories earlier in the day is better.
Yeah.
Eating calories less often is better.
We tend to have a bigger. We're lucky because we can do it, but we have a bigger meal in the middle of the day, and we don't eat. We might eat at 5 or 6 p.m. We don't eat after that, because we sleep better. So
these are the sort of, many of our patients come to this if people are not happy with their weight loss and they're wondering, I've done quite well with the diabetes, but I'd like to lose some more weight. I'm often talking about, could you eat earlier in the day? Let's cut out breakfast perhaps, or which would be the easiest meal to give up? And I've seen it help. Just on the dry fasting, that would make me nervous. There are some medications that would make me nervous of dry fasting, particularly SGLT2 inhibitors, where dehydration and ketosis can be a bit of a problem. So we know nothing about dry fasting. It's a thing. Perhaps you're going to teach us right now.
No, it's I want to get through all the questions, but dry fasting is very effective. I mean, I agree that you have to be careful with people on medications, but people not on medications who dry fast have remarkable results. Now, this is very rule of thumb, but it's almost like 1 day of dry fasting is equivalent to 3 days of water fast. You do get a dramatic difference in many things, lower blood glucose, just general sort of weight loss. Sleep actually really improves. It's incredible, but I am very much on your side with just have to be extremely cautious with it. But it is popular, you see. Now I don't actually promote it, but I get clients that come to me and try it.
But so of course, Ramadan, they're not drinking during. My Muslim friends, that's a dry fast because they're not drinking. And in the UK, you're not drinking till it goes dark. And in Ramadan in May here, that's dry fasting every day.
Well, it's definitely definitely people are loving you, by the way. I'm trying to stick to the questions, but there are so many people saying things like you're very entertaining, you should start a YouTube channel, the Unwins
We're just yours.
which would be great. I love this question, and then Rich, you can take over, because then I can stop panicking about this is a really hot topic as well, because people talk to me about eating lots of fruit and saying, well, it doesn't show up that badly on my glucose monitor. And then I say, well, it's not a fructose monitor for a start, so you could be damaging your liver, you know. So anyway, here's the question. White Wolf, do the continual glucose monitors measure glycation and fructation? I doubt it very much. What do you know about that?
Well, they do and they don't, you see, because if you have so much fructose that damages your liver and you get fatty liver, then that affects insulin sensitivity. And so not in the short term, but in the medium term, your blood sugar is rising with a lot of fructose. And at that point, you'll notice it on a blood sugar monitor. So of course, it's there measuring glucose, not fructose. But fructose eventually affects glucose via insulin sensitivity, is how I see it. And fatty liver is part of that, and fructose leads into that.
Can I ask a tangential question? Because many people get obsessed. This is for Jen, actually. They get addicted to the data. And I've literally had people wear 2 different glucose monitors and do finger pricking. You know,
so some people really get into the data, don't they? And then they get a ketone monitor as well, and then they're trying to triangulate that with the breath meter, and that again, that it's another danger, isn't it, for those of us that get a little bit obsessed with anything. I think it's good to be aware that you can think about these things too much. That can be a personal sort of journey, can't it? I mean, I've definitely gone down some of those rabbit holes, and then like the fasting one, and then sort of come out again. And sometimes that's part of the journey, isn't it? You have to sort of go on that little expedition to see what you learn, and then you come back and you sort of reset a little bit. And I think so long as you've got that, kind of broad view, trying to think about it in terms of your broad health.
I think it's so many of these things. It's about weighing up the pros and cons and being honest. Everything has pros and cons, and you do need to weigh those up. It's a bit like Twitter. How much time do I spend on Twitter? It's in that way, it's good. In that way, it isn't. And I think that trying to be honest, and if you're lucky, you're married to somebody who will tap you on the head from time to time. We all need to look at pros and cons.
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, what would you like me to add in there, Steve? Is a couple of things that, I mean, fructose was one point. Fructose in a state of insulin resistance through the polyalcohol pathway further increases insulin resistance. It'll increase glucose. So fruit still can affect the body in a negative way. Touch base on the protein. I know that you mentioned the protein will elicit an insulin response. It is considerably lower than carbohydrate, and a protein is the one that I tend to push more than anything, because everything in nature that we consume is protein, and protein comes with fat. And I think if we eat as nature intended, an egg, for example, contains almost equal amounts of protein and fat. Chicken breast with the skin on, a piece of beef, all of these things nature provides us almost with this perfectly packaged present of almost equal volumes of protein and fat. We need that fat to assimilate the proteins and our fat-soluble vitamins. We need the fats for production of cholesterol, and cholesterol is imperative for cell formation, cell communication, nutrient absorption, nutrient transportation, the production of hormones. It's essential for healing. Every cell in the body is made of protein, and every cell in the body is made of fat. And I think a lot of people fear excess protein through the fear of gluconeogenesis, pulling one from a ketogenic state, if that was the goal. But this comes from a study based on carbohydrate, where they put people who were consuming lots of carbohydrate, increased the protein, and it altered the insulin to glucagon ratio by 2,000%, which would certainly be enough to pull one from a ketogenic state if that transpired while living a ketogenic lifestyle. But when we carried out the same study on a ketogenic lifestyle, it altered the insulin to glucagon ratio by 5%, which as a whole number remained unchanged. So even though it may affect a ketone reading, I don't believe that it confers too much damage. I think there's, and you can go in so deep into the weeds with this, isn't it? But I think protein is so important because protein comes with fat and it contains every vitamin and mineral that we need, not just to survive, but thrive, whereas vegetables don't. You touched base earlier on dopamine and serotonin, which is one of the compounds, the transmitters, the neurotransmitters, which we didn't speak about during, or we didn't go into depth in regards to our podcast. And that is really important. Again, it's another reward pathway, which comes from tyrosine or tryptophan, I believe, isn't it? And we need vitamin B6, pyridoxine, and magnesium in order to create serotonin. We can't get pyridoxine through vegetables, not in high volumes at least. And the issue then with lack of B6 or pyridoxine is that if we're not consuming enough of the animal proteins, we're also not getting enough niacin, which is vitamin B3. And then the body will convert, it'll use the tryptophan that we are consuming in our diet to make niacin. And the ratio is about 60-1. So 60 milligrams of tryptophan will create 1 milligram of niacin. So now we're in a tryptophan deficiency, and now we've got a serotonin problem. And then we go for the sugary treat, and it's a vicious cycle. And I think we could go into so much detail in regards to this, but it all comes back to eating real food. And for this reason, this is why I always tell people not to fear protein. Eat real animal proteins and eat it as nature intended with the fat. And so I always ask a little bit of caution in regards to that subject when people mention, not eating too much protein, because I think we may probably or possibly cause more damage through not consuming the animal protein than if we are actively trying to avoid it. But it's
that's probably the case for more people, isn't it? Most people aren't eating enough protein.
For sure.
Can we? I'm really sorry to wrap up now because 8 o'clock. Just to tell people who've never seen us, we're on a different platform where we can speak a little bit more freely, and that platform rhymes with apple crumble. And the link is in the comments if you want to go and look, because YouTube doesn't let us talk about absolutely everything we want to talk about. Jen and David, can we thank you very much for being here? An hour wasn't enough. I didn't think it would
never
be.
Is. No, never is.
But thank you for doing this. It's been great.
You're welcome. Ask us again in a few months. We'll come back.
You guys are welcome on absolutely any time. And I don't know if you're up for this, Steve, but I mean, we jump on the other platform, which we can't mention on this one. You're more than welcome to join in on that one if you wanted to. But I don't know if you guys want to stay on when we wrap up and we can have a brief chat for about 30 seconds to a minute before we have to jump on the next one. But thank you all for watching and listening as always. Thank you both for coming on. Absolute pleasure as always. And take care. And I will see you all soon.
Good work.